You know, there's something really weird with South Australia. Just yesterday, with only 5 new infections, this Premier was blasting states like Western Australia and Queensland for closing their borders to South Australians. And he said, you know, we can't have a situation where every single time there is an example of community transmission, we shut up the entire country. Yet this same bloke today, with just 2 new infections, he locks up his whole state. People not allowed even out of their own homes for exercise now. Joining me is the panel, Rita Panahi, Herald Sun columnist, the Sky News host, now in a quarantine hotel after covering the US elections, and South Australian Daniel Wild, Director of Research at the Institute of Public Affairs. Where are you now, Daniel? You back in Victoria or caught up in this one?
No, caught up in this one, Andrew, in the Sky studio here in Adelaide, which I will only be able to do for the next 5 hours as we enter what is the harshest lockdowns ever seen in the history of the state, Andrew.
Well, I'm trying to feel sorry for you. You jumped the border to escape Victoria's lockdown, and look where you've ended, frying pan and fire. Why the 180-degree switch, do you think, from the Premier after just two new infections?
Well, the first thing to say, Andrew, is we do know this virus can get out of hand very quickly, so it needs to be taken very seriously. But the issue here, Andrew, is the first statement from Stephen Marshall is the right one. That was a statement that would be consistent with the successful approach used in New South Wales. So if you have a risk-based, proportionate, targeted approach to managing any outbreak. The second statement from Stephen Marshall that you put up there, and the statement that is informing these very harsh lockdowns in South Australia, is in line with the failed Victorian strategy of Daniel Andrews. And what I would say, Andrew, is that Stephen Marshall should not be taking his cues from Daniel Andrews when it comes to how to handle the coronavirus. Now, this gets to a much bigger issue, which is the fallacy of the elimination strategy. We know, Andrew, and you've discussed this many times, and we've discussed this together, that elimination is not the right strategy to pursue because it necessitates lockdowns in response to low-risk localised outbreaks like we're seeing in South Australia. Instead, what we need is to have a much more targeted approach and not shutting down entire cities or entire states in accordance with these very, very draconian measures.
Rita, how do you explain 5 infections yesterday? The other states are terrible for, you know, closing their borders to us. 2 infections today, and he closes down his whole state.
It is contradictory. It is confused. He said today that they've got it under control. They think they've contained this outbreak, which is only a couple of dozen infections, not a couple of dozen deaths, just infections, and yet they've gone into full-blown panic mode. This severe lockdown, it's 6 days. Let's hope it remains 6 days, because as we have seen elsewhere, these lockdowns sometimes for a short period of time end up being running for weeks and months at a time. Because if you do have an unofficial eradication strategy, that's what you have to do. If there's even a single infection out there, you take these draconian measures and you don't pay any attention to all the consequences. I'm not just talking about economic consequences. We've been across that. But the people who've got operations to attend to, the people who put off going in and getting treatment or early intervention for a lump they found, or for concerns about heart issues, or getting a cancer screening, all those things that are falling by the wayside because all the focus is on this one virus.
Absolutely. I just think with you, Rita, we've said, I've said that we've not taken seriously enough the fact that our quarantine hotels are our biggest point of vulnerability. Here's another outbreak from a quarantine hotel. Australians flying back from places like the US where the virus is raging. You've done that. Are you happy with the security you've seen at the quarantine hotel you're at?
Yeah, I'm in Sydney, and I've got to say the processes here and how they go about things, I couldn't fault them. I think they're completely on top of it. They've streamlined it so they get things done quickly. When you come in at the airport to the time you're at the hotel is a fairly short period of time. You've got minimal contact with anybody, and yeah, they've got it. This is the gold standard in New South Wales, and I think if the rest of the country wants to know how to handle this crisis, look at New South Wales, and they've had a significant number of these outbreaks, and each time they've contained them without imposing further restrictions. In fact, they have gradually eased restrictions throughout. And New South Wales has shown that if you've got competent contact tracing, even if you have a burst of infections, you can continue to get on with business and contain it. And yet South Australia, instead of looking to New South Wales, has got looking at Victoria. It's bizarre.
And they've had months of no infections to prepare for this.